Check, check, check. Hello. Check, check. There we go. All right. Calling the meeting to order, 10:02. Can we get a roll call, please, Amber? Or whoever's doing that.
Chair Fan is absent. Vice Chair Rocha,
Here.
Nicole Kennedy,
Here.
Arnold Urias,
Here.
Anthony Teeters,
Here.
Randy Goodman,
Here.
Luther Kraxberger.
Here.
Did I get everybody? Okay.
I think so. Thank you, Amber. All right, we'll go to item 3, discussion and action items. 3A, approval of minutes from June 5th, 2024 Workforce Housing Committee meeting and the June 6th, 2024 Workforce Housing Committee stakeholder meeting. Do we have a motion for those minutes?
I'll motion.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? Nope. All right, minutes pass. We will move on to item 3B, presentation and discussion regarding identifying city and privately owned land within city limits suitable for workforce housing. Is that you, George?
I think it's me.
All right, take it away, sir.
I have to get close to the microphone. I always get yelled at for not talking loud enough, except in the office. One of the things we anticipated early on in the process was the city participating in development of workforce housing by looking at and maybe contributing land to the process. We have been working with our GIS folks, that's our mapping folks with the city, to map out properties in the city that are vacant, and then to map out properties in the city that are owned by the city, and that may be appropriately zoned or not otherwise encumbered with other infrastructure. As far as cities our size go, I think I mentioned early on in your meetings that we're relatively land poor. We own a lot of areas that are very specifically designated for things like parks or within the airport, where they are basically predetermined for use and not necessarily available for other types of uses. And otherwise, most of what we own are fragments left over from projects or pieces of property that were donated to us. And in most cases, those donated properties come with encumbrances as well. Think Acker Park, for instance. That can be nothing but a park forever by the deed restrictions that came with the property. So we've produced a couple of maps that I would like you to take an opportunity to come walk around and look at, and we'll have some discussion, perhaps offline, or we can carry microphones around if necessary, to talk about some of the properties that we know may be available for development, that the city may be able to contribute some to, and then private properties that we may want to reach out to the property owners and say, these properties could be something that we would help you with through some sort of process to develop workforce housing. I think it's important to understand just how little of those properties there are in the core part of town, though I think those properties that we do have in the core part of town, especially the city-owned properties, should be the primary focus for the city's participation, at least as far as land goes, because those properties are almost all zoned correctly. They have that zoning entitlement is a big deal that eliminates a lot of legal objection to the use of the property. You're always going to have, I'm going to use the word NIMBY, you're always going to have a NIMBY argument against workforce housing. As incorrect as it is usually, you're going to have that argument. And overcoming that is sometimes difficult when it's done in a public setting. If a property already has entitlement, legal entitlement to that development, it removes the pressure on decision makers to take into account some of the concerns of neighbors about whether it should be or shouldn't be housing, and focus more on getting the benefit of workforce housing instead. So what we did with this map in particular is identify properties that are city-owned properties that are vacant to a degree A couple of them have some structures on them or some features on them, but the majority of the property may be vacant. And we've color coded them as to whether or not they have encumbrances, legal or otherwise, such as park property that was acquired for the purpose of a park is identified as not buildable. It's not something we're going to put workforce housing on directly. In some cases, we may have some flexibility. Watson and Willow Lake Park, for instance, we have some peripheral areas that we may be able to look at. At this point, we haven't, primarily because of infrastructure. It's just not there. I think one thing that we wanted to get out of this discussion this morning, however, was not necessarily identifying what properties are available, but which properties we should be concentrating on. Where should staff do the digging? Because as you know, all of us have another job. And spending extra time looking at property in an area that you might not want us to be looking at doesn't make sense. So we want to get your input as to where do we focus? Which properties do we focus on, or which areas of town do we focus on? And then we'll do that extra work. We just don't want to do it everywhere all the time, when that might not be an area that we really need to focus on. And getting this committee's guidance is important for that. On the multicolored map, we have one map that's all red. It's very positive. Red's a positive color. This one really identifies mostly privately held property in the city. So this is actually an important map. This one identifies publicly owned property and categorizes it, again, color-coded, to properties that may or may not be more appropriate for workforce housing. This one's a public outreach map. This is where we figure out, do we go out and talk to property owners about particular properties? Is it worth it? Are we going to pick an individual lot in the ranch? No. Are we going to pick a larger block of property that may be in the vicinity of downtown that has nothing on it yet? Maybe. The other thing we have to look at is the actual terrain of the property, and that comes second. Once we've narrowed a list down of where to look, then we start looking at property terrain. If you pick a property that is full of rocks, you're not building affordable housing on that property. It's going to cost too much to build. If you can find a piece of property that's relatively flat, has infrastructure nearby or adjacent to it, is city-owned already or is adjacent to property we already own, and have some control of development of the adjacent properties, then that one's a good possibility. That would we want to pursue. That would be worth the extra time necessary to figure out whether that property is appropriate. I'm going to get up and point a couple of properties out, and I apologize. These maps were too large to put on a board. We don't have a board this size, so if you need to stand up and look at it, feel free. I'm just going to point a few things out to you.
That's fine. Yeah, we can go
Yeah,
workshop
well,
style here, go around.
Grab the microphones and come around even. I think that might help a little bit. I do want to point out that we have expert staff in the room. Brian Sparks is our real estate administrator. He's going to be familiar with acquiring properties, but he's also familiar with which properties we own and whether or not, at least many of them, whether or not they have restrictions on them. And we also have Michael's going to jump into the conversation at some point when my voice runs out. And of course, Chelsea will be able to jump in anytime she wants to. So one of the things that we first looked at were where outside the city do we have properties? Because these areas are also potential for workforce housing. Remember, it's a regional problem, not just a Prescott problem. We own a lot of property in Chino Valley. A lot of it's encumbered by either current or intended future uses, well fields, water infrastructure mostly. And those areas that aren't, they may be a potential for us to do something up there on those properties. That's something that that we should consider as well as within corporate limits of Prescott. As property owner up here, we still have to go through Chino Valley's development process, but maybe we hold water over their head or something and get through the process easier. We also have a lot of property that we own in the vicinity of the airport. Residential development near the airport is problematic. Not an area that we're likely to focus on. Most of the property that's not actually inside the boundaries of the airport is city-owned golf course, which, I'm not a golfer. I'm okay giving it up to build housing, but I think a lot of other people would object to that. Some industrial areas, this is a very large solar farm up here. And then we have a wastewater treatment plant. So just given the mix of land uses up here, probably not a focus area. We included the Big Chino Water Ranch because we own it, but there is no infrastructure out there. And it's miles and miles away, probably too far away. So those are within Chino Valley corporate limits. If I recall correctly, those are well fields or tank sites.
Both.
So not developed.
We're probably not going to occupy much of the site with anything other than the infrastructure for security reasons.
Say one thing. So with understanding the committee's initial focus of really putting homes downtown or closer to the nexus of Prescott, we're really trying to hone in on available properties that are close within Prescott limits. We are not discounting these ones, but they're going to take additional conversations with our capital improvement project manager, because I do think there's opportunity on some of these parcels, on portions of some of them. A lot of them, like George mentioned, there's large tank sites, there's large pumps, there's all kinds of infrastructure. But similar to what we have with parks and such, is it a conversation of can we designate a part of that larger piece of land for workforce? We're having those conversations with Public Works, with Parks and Rec, but I feel like the focus of today should be more on what do we have available within the city limits, and let those conversations continue in the background, if that makes sense.
But that's all related to water, tanks and pumps, so there's no hazard,
Infrastructure.
there's no hazard there though.
No, it's just our water infrastructure sites, generally there are security concerns, so we would have to make sure that the site itself is contained. And often we own a large piece of property with a well on it. It's a large piece of property because we may want to move the well or put a different well on the same property. So that's something that we're working through to figure out whether these properties, a larger one like this, for instance, do we need the whole thing for what's on there?
Right.
Or could some of it be dedicated to housing? At this point, we haven't come to that conclusion yet, just started conversations. And as we're working towards downtown, Chelsea's point is a good one. One of the best ways that you can make development more affordable is to have already existing infrastructure. So infill development is what we're looking at. And you get infill development as you move into downtown or into areas that are already substantially built.
So, George, I have a question directed to maybe Chelsea or you, specific to leveraging our GIS friends. Within the city limits, do we have the capacity to identify neighborhoods or targeted areas that we want to incentivize with a revitalization campaign in those areas where we have infrastructure? That would be question one. Question two, for our more rural or outlying areas like Chino Valley, can we have our GIS friends maybe do a overlay on the map that would show two variables? Number one, we could overlay with USDA eligibility. USDA rural financing enables 100% financing, and it targets low to moderate income based on that census. That program is not eligible within the city limits of Prescott, but some of these outlying areas are eligible. And then the other variable to development on the outline would be a potential overlay with maybe topography. So we could identify where it would be feasible to start.
To answer the second question first, I don't know if we have the map layer data to do the overlay on the eligibility for the areas outside of the corporate limits. We can look at that. That's probably a data set that we can get from the feds.
Yes.
So we typically don't use that, so I don't know if we have it. So we can certainly look at that. As far as the other GIS possibilities, They have a lot of data that's available to them. They're very cooperative with us in making maps. We can produce maps with topography. We can produce maps with particular neighborhood open spaces. We can go through that map and identify every single property owner of every one of those properties. I mean, I can get a list of all of them. That is something that's pretty easy for us to do. So we have a very good working relationship with our mapping folks. And I'll ask about the,
Revitalization.
yeah.
Is that, I think as a group, we should come up with some ideas on providing that incentive to revitalize certain neighborhoods, create a win-win, less opposition from the public too.
Yeah. Very good. Did you?
George, given the fact that you have already gone through that, could you help us drill down, and have you identified a few parcels that would be ready to go?
There's one. There's just one. Right? Yeah. So there are several that actually we think potentially have the ability to be redeveloped with the city participating in it as a property owner and maybe to a different degree along the way. The biggest one is actually the property adjacent to the adult center. To the adult center. We own a very large piece of property there. It was originally acquired with the intention of us working some deal with PUSD to put a school there. That was 30 years ago. Fire station's still in consideration for that location. But the location of the property minus the adult center property and minus the fire station is still about 18 acres. It's a lot of land potentially to be built on. It is surrounded by neighbors. So there's a PR aspect to it that will be necessary, but it's also zoned correctly. So legally, you have no obligation to tell the neighbors what you're doing, and you certainly don't have an obligation to ask them. Obviously, that's not how we operate. We're going to be transparent about it. And one way that it can be addressed is to design development of the site with someone who would develop it. We aren't talking about the city being a developer. I think that's important for us to just emphasize. We're not building houses. We're not a developer. We'll partner with someone who does do that. And it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who does workforce level housing as their primary focus, as long as we can provide them guidance on how to be more focused on creating workforce level housing. And Mike has a good picture of the site. So it's got some issues. The gray strip across it at an angle is an enormous ditch that carries water to a holding pond in the southeast corner. There's a natural holding area to the northeast that's a darker color green because there's water there, it grows better. That area would also need to be avoided. But minus those two areas, and maybe with a box culvert bridge to get across that ditch, you potentially could get townhouses on the west. The neighborhood to the west of it is townhouses. Single-family lots on the east. The neighborhood on the east is single-family lots. A buffer strip at the back, partly because of that large retention area that we want to stay out of. And maybe a multifamily structure or structures in the middle closer to the adult center, still leaving enough room at the very front for the possibility of a fire station. That property has a lot of potential for being a location where affordable housing could be constructed in a way that could reduce the amount of neighborhood objection, the NIMBY argument, because you're building housing similar to what they have, just at a lower cost. And the lower cost is important.
George, quick question. How many workforce housing units you think for a project like that?
By right, you could get about 50. It's neighborhood-oriented business zoning allows 21 units per acre. So minus the physical constraints of the site, you could get that many units. From a practical standpoint, and again, matching up with the adjacent developments with the types of housing, you're probably looking at 30 units, most of which would be multifamily.
Is this area right here? So there's a grade drop. So you're right, the ditch is there, but it starts to subtly go down back behind there.
Correct.
See that sort of area that's That elongated triangle right there? It's like
Right.
facing more on Rosser? What do you think the size of that area is? If that's all 18 acres, you're saying?
4 acre, 5 acres.
4 or 5 acre parcel? Well, that's not
Yeah.
bad. You can do a lot with that.
And then access, there's actually a street cut here into the property that was designed into the subdivision plat. And if we were going to build a fire station, it would probably be just to the west of that. From a practical standpoint of having access, that would be a location we would reserve in case the city pursued that. But that's a property that could have a big impact as far as the number of units as compared to the rest of the property we're going to talk about. Everything else is much smaller. That's also one that's going to take a lot more work. We need to work with Public Works on infrastructure. There are a number of drainage facilities there that might get rerouted. We might be able to move that big ditch through the middle of it somewhat. Our rules are that water comes into a site and goes off of a site where it naturally occurs. Inside the site, you can shift the drainage around. We would be able to, bring it in closer to Rosser Street and a box culvert bridge over.
George, did you say the retention basin is that would stay, or?
The large dark area, I would stay out of just because that's a natural drainage basin.
Could that be
Been there
made into
forever.
like?
With engineering.
Could you
We could confine it more, make it smaller.
make it into a park or anything like that? Or is that what?
It can be multi-use. Well, one of the things that planners are doing today in urban areas, a lot of urban areas, is multiple. Did I steal your? Okay. It can be a park. It can be ball fields. It just needs to be something that you get out of when it's raining and it fills up with water. But when the water's gone, you still have a park to use again. So that's certainly something. A dog walking park, or again, a ball field could go in there. A small ball field could go in there.
George, can you explain a little bit about what the process would look like with the city as a partner in this project? I mean, are we talking
Can we talk about that in a couple minutes?
teacherage type project again, like PUSD? Are we talking this is an RFP for someone to come and just buy this, or?
There's a whole bunch of different ways to approach it. I have had a conversation with Randy about a different piece of property, and the concept that he's come up with for that property would work on almost any property we own. It's a partnership. We aren't a builder. Our partnership may be to put the land up for sale. It may be to put the land up for lease. It may be that we just become a partner with the developer and hold the land for a while. And it may also be that we contribute infrastructure costs. One thing we do well as a city is build infrastructure. We're very good at building water and sewer lines and streets and drainage facilities. So those may be things that the city contribute to the process to keep the cost down again. The upfront cost of construction and development is what drives the overall cost of the housing at the end. So whatever we can contribute to bring down that initial cost is going to be a major impact, or have a major impact on the ultimate cost of the housing that gets built. Did you want to talk? Go for it.
Well, we're going to make a presentation to all of you guys today just to brainstorm. So whenever you're ready, we have some handouts and stuff. And I want to noodle it down to something small and very manageable, city-owned property. She knows what I'm talking about. And then I'll kind of give you our concept of what we've been discussing about how to proceed. And then you guys start throwing in ideas on it. So whenever you're ready, we'll move to that. But
Let
you
me
guys.
focus a little bit more on a few of the other properties, because one of these other properties is the one Randy's been working on. So we have a couple of other properties that are encumbered. This is a very large property, but it's also a mountain. So very steep. There's a bunch of water tanks on top of it. We're about to build another water tank up there. That one's probably off the table. Even the periphery of it is too steep. The yellow properties in downtown, mostly in the east side of downtown, are potentials. Those yellow properties have some improvements on them, but not necessarily occupying the whole property. So those are areas that we would like to focus on. Again, getting your direction to focus on particular areas.
So, George, are those primarily improved as like drainage improvements, water infrastructure? I mean, no buildings is what you're saying, essentially?
Most of them don't have
Okay.
big structures on them, but some of these do. So this is actually the Public Works complex over on Virginia Street. So some of them are fully occupied and not subject to building. Not available. The ones we're really focused on, and we can produce a better map zoomed in on the areas. I noticed trying to find some of these properties is a little problematic, are the purple ones in the downtown area. So the purple properties are vacant. They're unencumbered with any current plans for infrastructure on them as far as we are aware today, and we have done some research. One of the important ones is a property on South Alarcon Marina? I forgot.
That up on the,
There you go.
see,
That one.
this one. It's right
So-
by the Boys and Girls.
Boys and Girls Club. Oh, yeah. So next to the Boys and Girls Club, west of the Boys and Girls Club is a parking lot, which is part of their development, part of their need. But just to the south of that, the city owns 2 lots that have been combined together that used to have a building on them. It used to have a house on them. It's been vacant since we acquired them decades ago. That's already zoned for multifamily. It's surrounded by multifamily development. It has infrastructure in the street already. It's one of those places where you're not going to get complaints from neighbors who live in multifamily about multifamily development. You're not going to get complaints in a mixed use area where there are a few single family homes, but those single family homes are outnumbered by multifamily businesses. It's zoned correctly, so it has legal entitlement. The issue of it there is simply trying to figure out what kind of development could go on it that's most efficient, that meets the zoning requirements. Again, what we don't want to do is to open up the entitlement. So you don't want to rezone it to something else because that opens up the whole entitlement process. Those 2 properties in combination are sized to allow up to 6 residential units as a multifamily development. And that's the one in particular that Randy's been focused on. So maybe now is a good time for you to talk about.
Whenever.
Go for it.
Let me ask before you start that, where is that in relation to the marina, the apartment complexes with the 90 units trying to get through?
It is northeast about a quarter mile. It's on the map.
Right there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because there's a lot of
And George-
NIMBYism with that project.
Yeah, we have 2 other projects. I don't know if we want to pivot the conversation yet and have everybody sit down, or if you want to go over those 2.
Do we want to wrap up any questions on the actual map itself?
Because there's 2 other properties that we have that real quick, I think we can take you through before we can, and then we can sit down and look at handouts together. So the other parcels are a little unique. This one was acquired by the city a long time ago. We're still digging into all of the encumbrances, but it's off of Plaza Drive, and you can see the utility wraps all around it. And I believe it is used as kind of a circular drive to access the properties, but there's a huge centerpiece that the city owns, and it's already zoned for residential. So this is just another one of those potentials, and it looks like it's about an acre and a half there. I imagine, with setbacks and things, it would probably be trimmed down to less than an acre. But again, another already owned parcel that we have. And then the last one, let me see. Okay, this is off of LaRue, off of west, far west LaRue. This was intended, as you can see, to be a knuckle drive where all of the homes around it were going to access from, but all of the homes around it have accessed either off of LaRue or off of that street above it. Is that Bertrand? No. I can't tell what that is. No, it's just north of LaRue.
Is the center of that donut?
Also owned by the city.
It is. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So this doesn't show up on our map here because it's listed as right of way and not vacant property. So, but this is another really good piece of property in a residential area, zoning SF9. Again, just potential near downtown, lots of walkability, lots of really good, good features on this one. So we've brought to you four specific, single family zoning. We've brought to you four specific properties that if you'd like, we can continue to dig. We've had meetings with Public Works, with Joe Baines, with Facilities and Parks and Rec, and with Brian. So we've done a lot of vetting, but if you'd like us to continue to explore it, we can dig deeper. We can also pivot and talk to the ownership and what Randy has to present. But I think these are really good, already owned, already zoned appropriately properties that we can get going on. Something, yeah.
That's very helpful.
So let me just ask real quick, just on that piece of property, because I think that's a great potential. In order to help out as much as the city can do, because we really haven't figured everything out yet, would a structure, and we should probably talk to the mayor and maybe our legal department about this, but just a suggestion, in order to help somebody, if we as a city, if I'm defining everything that costs us money, the upfront costs, one of the biggest thing is the holding cost of the land. Let's explore whether the city would either defer those holding costs, maybe demand payment after it's built out and they're sold. I mean, something in order to defer that large cost right up front. And then, of course, you've got the water meter, the permitting, the timing. Those things are things I think that we can help out. Maybe not give away the taxpayer dollars, because we really can't do that. But if we could defer payment at a reduced interest rate, that would help the initial upfront costs.
That's the pitch you're going to get here in a couple
Oh,
of
okay.
minutes.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay,
Well,
very good.
and I'm glad you brought that up because we don't have a whole lot of tangibles
Right.
to leverage. But like you always say, time is money in the development
is
world.
total money.
And that is absolutely something that we can assist with. Permitting, well, another one is going to be water, but expediting the permit process, helping with the land, helping with things like that, as well as coordination. If it's a city project, then we can look at also helping with just development coordination and things.
Well, then you also have to remember in the process, most of these people don't have the cash to put up front. When you do like an owner builder thing, you've got draws you've got to come up with, and if the cost of the land and that draw could be one balloon payment at the end of the project, then you wouldn't have to go through all that. That's another big, huge time saver.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out too that time is money, but it goes both ways, right? So time saved up front saves the cost, but in talking to quite a few colleagues that do construction, do development, they're more than willing to offer affordable housing, if you will, right? Like essentially, if they can work something out with a city, with a private owner, of extending the time to be able to pay back some of those deferred costs, because then now it's a partnership. Now it's like, hey, we're coming in here, city can put in the dirt, but instead of just saying, here's all your money for the dirt, and then that has to transfer immediately to the end user, why don't we just defer that over 20 years? You get attainable housing for 20 plus years preserved, and we're willing to do that as a developer builder, right? And that's kind of how those partnerships work. So,
Well, and to be clear, the city would still make the money back. It would just be a longer hold, right?
of course, yeah, okay.
One thing to consider with city-owned property, unlike most undeveloped privately held properties, we actually own properties that are perfectly developable. Many of these, if you go and look at those properties, there's a topographical issue with them. That's why it's still vacant. Well, a lot of the properties we've acquired over the years through donation or city acquisition for various reasons are relatively flat. They have infrastructure nearby. They could be a first step in the process and maybe encourage someone else to do something with their property.
Well, yeah, and put simply, the way I see it is you got two maps here. This map is the one that would have provided workforce housing if it could, but it can't, right? Like this is essentially the map that I see too. It's like the topo issues, the infrastructure costs, all these things, right? All that does is we've seen that for years and years. You get the private dirt, it costs this much to develop, you get your $650,000 houses. That's why to us it's worth narrowing down. I mean, I did have a question about this one, George. This one's showing as residential zoned. I don't think it was up there as part of anything, but it looks fairly big.
It's got a lot of boulders on it, so this is
Yeah.
a park.
Mm-hmm.
And
Off
so
of Gale,
if
yeah.
I remember correctly,
Is that heading up to,
it heads up the Thumb View. So I
Yeah,
think
everything that way is going to have a lot of
It's
boulders
starts
on it.
going
But
up.
we acquired it for some reason. It was either given to us or we purchased it for some reason.
yeah, I mean a handful of these. This one, any of these little ones, even if it's one house.
That's a house.
Yeah, one or two houses. This one I'd be careful with because that whole neighborhood you're going to get a lot of pushback on.
No, but I'm just talking about for redevelopment.
Oh, okay.
You know,
Well, that's one of the other, you want to talk
Yeah.
about something?
Yeah, so we also, in looking at these properties, there were some that weren't developable. There were some that, might not work for workforce housing in particular. And the idea would be, and this was kind of on the agenda for the next item, but do we look at approaching council to say, can we use these as a land swap? Can we resell these for other purposes with the proceeds going to workforce housing or something like that? There's a lot of property. We own a lot, a very random lot off of Willow Creek Road, and it's behind one of our 20-foot retaining walls, no access. So the only potential for that lot is if we sell it to the adjacent owners for them to increase their lot size. But
Helipad access.
right, helipad access only. But again, it's vacant. We own it. Could we resell it? So those are some other options that we're also looking into as we go through methodically property that we own.
is the committee good with having staff put together those, what we'll call them difficult lots on a list that then we could probably recommend for council to do that? That seems like kind of obvious. I mean, low hanging fruit for us.
I think we could probably create two lists. One of these lots are highest potential for some form of development. Again, the city's not a developer, we're not developing, but these are the highest, and these are lots that maybe we want to consider disposing of somehow or swapping somehow in a way that could let us acquire more lots, that we could then apply the things that you mentioned that Randy's going to talk about, ways that the city could help carry some of the cost out longer term so that it keeps the affordability down.
So just in practical sense, it would probably be selling them, taking the funds of the sale and essentially putting into that workforce housing fund or.
Yeah, it could be.
It would be part.
Could be a separate fund where we pay for infrastructure improvements, maybe, for workforce housing project on city-owned property. So it would have to be one of our properties, but we may actually be able to contribute cash instead of just the land if we were to sell property and dedicate the sale proceeds.
do we do any proactive work on lots like you just talked about the helicopter pad? I mean, have we ever sent letters out to those people to see if they'd be interested?
Not to our knowledge.
Oh, okay.
Not that I know
See,
of.
that's something I think we should be doing anyway. I mean, besides the workforce
ample
housing.
That
time.
would be the second list then, right, George?
Right.
Okay.
That would be the second list.
Yeah.
And maybe that list then ultimately ends up with us looking at privately owned properties near the ones that we're looking at on that second list and saying, well, while we're at it, let's talk to these people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're willing to buy our lot to add to theirs, or maybe they're willing to contribute somehow.
Or swap for property
Yeah.
they own elsewhere.
Is there I love these, by the way. I know you guys did a lot of work on this, so thank you. Is there an easy way to color code any of those adjoining private parcels that would apply? Okay.
Yes. So we could color code them a couple of different ways. One is whether or not they're being marketed right now. Is there a real estate sign on it? The other would be maybe topographic challenge. The ones that are really difficult, we want to topographically. Yes, that one's a property of last resort, future resort, maybe. That would be pretty easy to do. One other way we could color code them is availability of infrastructure at the property. Is there water and sewer right there, right in front of the property? Like many of these that we've talked about, there's water and sewer infrastructure and water and sewer capacity at the property already.
Maybe consider removing those from the map, the ones that are not built.
Yeah.
Because it gets a little overwhelming when you look at all of them.
Yeah, that one's overwhelming.
That could be a full-time job.
Does anybody know if that's topographically hard? I know there's a water tower up here somewhere.
We looked at that one specifically.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, the large portion of that lot is encumbered, is specifically designated as open space and cannot change. However, there are a lot of lots adjacent in the green, immediately adjacent. Those are boulder piles on top of a gigantic hill. That road leads up to a water tower that's on top, and it's quite difficult. However, there is an adjacent purple down at the base of that we were also looking at. We didn't bring it today because that property needs a little bit more digging as far as entitlements and how it came into the city's handling. So we weren't ready for that one for you today, but opportunity, yes, but on a very small portion of that property. I think, oh, okay, go for it.
Just the zoning on the Dignity Health parking lot.
So that is, yeah. So that area is, where the parking is now is zone, sorry, where the parking is now for Dignity Health or for whatever they are. I'm still calling them YRMC. I can't help myself. That parking, that area is zone commercial. Commercial zoning allows multifamily as a by right use at the highest level, 28 units an acre. Just to the west of that, YRMC owns an additional 2 lots that are vacant, that are between their parking and the apartment buildings that belong to US Vets, a little further west. That's zone multifamily, high density, 28 units an acre. So I've had a brief conversation with them about looking at their own property for the possibility of doing maybe what we're about to talk about. You know, maybe they continue to own it, but they do what we're talking about and make it available for development. So that was a good question.
One last thing before we sit down and pivot to the next item. I think it would be beneficial for our team in looking at the outreach and privately held properties if we had parameters from you. You can see that there are a lot of single vacant properties. I would imagine you don't really care for us to focus on reaching out to, that one random owner. So is there a geographical area you want us to focus on? Is there a size you want us to focus on? Like, we don't want you, Chelsea and team, to reach out to anything under an acre or anything under 2 acres. We want, if we're reaching out to private owners, we want it to be 5 acres or more or something like that. So if we could have a little bit more parameters. Right. Just some criteria to help us really hone in so that we can start communicating with owners, have you communicate with these owners, start that conversation. Any input?
And what does that reach out look like? What are we asking them?
So the first would be research. Number 1, is the property up for sale? Next, who owns it? How much other property do they own? What is the property zoned? Where is it located? Is it in a neighborhood already? Is it in a business area? So it's things of that nature, if that makes sense.
That one was for sale.
Do you have a zone? Is that the zoning map?
Yeah, we have the zoning map here.
Can we whip that one out real quick just to see what?
That one's gone.
So anything light yellow is single-family residential. Darker colored yellow is multifamily residential. If it's red, it's commercial, which allows multifamily.
What is all this here? That's
Yeah, that's this one.
oh, the BGBR stuff. Okay.
That one's a little problematic for infrastructure.
Topo infrastructure.
I think if it's possible, just my opinion, but I'm not the expert like some of the other people here. If we could focus on the multifamily just so that we could get more units per project that are buildable, that have utilities, that are infill. I don't know what you guys think, but that's my thought.
Maybe work our way out to single-family lots that are individual infill lots later.
Yeah.
Get a little more bang for your buck.
So my feedback is low-hanging fruit first. Easier to develop. We're protecting ourselves, margin of error. Because again, this is, for lack of a better term, the guinea pig, right? When you first start out, as we perfect the process, then we can start using our improved skills to then go into more challenging projects.
But that's going to weigh heavily on you guys coming up with a top of the scale. I mean, are we looking at a $2 million project or a $20 million project? That's going to determine the size of the property. So, I mean, how big of a nut do you want to bite off on that one? Because, do you think we could go for a $20 million project? I mean,
Well, hey, guys, can we?
keep it
Can
realistic.
we go through this pitch that George and I have been working on? Because a lot of what you're talking about, we've addressed and we're going to address. And I think it's going to be really helpful. And then we can come back and have these bigger discussions. Is that
Well,
okay?
I think on the agenda, the next one is like the tools and
No, we're
resources.
still
or
under
whatever.
this, though.
Yeah, I get that, but yours falls more into like putting something together as a tool. So I think I
Well,
just
it's
want to
a-
wrap this up
It's
pretty
a
much with the
format.
map.
It's a format to
Okay.
hopefully get us going.
Okay. I mean, I would say right now that infrastructure in place, infill lots, single family, 9, multifamily, medium, high is, those are going to be under an acre. Those are infill lots. I mean, those are, if anything could be done by right, I feel like that's the low-hanging fruit. I mean, as far as going bigger into sizes, into a more established project, I just don't know if that's really where the city wants to be in that space. That might be something more where it's like, well, these bigger projects are going to be bigger price tags, more infrastructure, more time. Maybe all we can do as a committee is to identify a couple of them that say, hey, infrastructure is pretty close by. Infrastructure might even already be there. And then kind of let the private sector, figure out how to go about. I mean, because again, we're incentivizing developers and builders. That's the goals that we're working towards. So I would say what we can control, or what maybe the city should look into, is really just those infill by right, water sewers in place kind of lots. And I think obviously the adult center is a great, I would think that if there would be one that is larger, that is a great piece that could be entertained for somebody to come in and partner with the city for sure.
It's probably going to be a little harder than the one Randy wants to talk about.
Sure.
When
The infrastructure.
I think from what I'm looking at as far as the city-owned property, the property on Plaza, or maybe even this property, would be good ones that the city looks into selling, because the neighborhood isn't necessarily going to lend itself to saying, yeah, put some workforce housing here, but you can get a better benefit from the city for selling it and then putting that infrastructure funds into the adult center property. And then you have an improved property that, the city can then encumber and say, hey, we need to do a private party JV, and the city still gets the benefit of the workforce housing and long-term gets the financial benefit of all those infrastructure funds that are just transferred over. So I think like the Plaza property, it's great, but I don't see anybody wanting to have workforce housing here, or even this one, like these handful that are in the areas that I think.
The high NIMBY probability zones.
Thank you.
So essentially, like to wrap, like you're almost saying, take even the ones that might have one unit on them,
Right.
and it's a way more beneficial investment for the city and the tax dollar to sell it.
Correct.
And then say this sold for whatever.
This $100,000 we can take over here
Yeah, and
improve and put our box culvert in, and then just lean that property. Maybe it's even a second, so that at some point, there's still designated funds there.
We recoup
Right.
the city's involvement.
Yeah.
Well, we need to be careful with that because from a rancher's perspective, God quit making dirt and we're dirt poor. So
Yeah.
you certainly understand the power of leveraging the equity in there. However, giving up land in a situation where we're already land poor, public opposition, that's a challenge that we can overcome. Running out of dirt, that's a challenge that's a lot
Yeah,
harder.
once you sell it, it's gone.
Yeah. Theoretically, it gets another house.
That's funny. I just keep thinking, would we rather be land poor or workforce housing poor? Because for these types of lots, right?
Yeah.
Like I get Arnold's point.
That we really don't need to have.
Yeah.
I mean, like that, to me, is a low-hanging fruit. And it's only going to benefit us in the long run. And we're not giving anything away. It's still
Sure.
still taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
We're shifting one asset to another. And this asset, by the way, is working now.
Yeah. Because I totally get your point of, like, if we were taking open space, parks, that kind of stuff, it could get very,
And
And we couldn't
very
anyway.
hairy.
And to elaborate on my point is if we are getting that premium there, then that's what I meant by leverage. But if we're not getting the premium, then that's where we have to be careful. Yeah.
Well, don't you think it would be a wise move for us to identify the most expensive piece of property that is disposable, to sell it and now make that money work for the city rather than just sitting there? Right? Carefully. But we're also, remember, we're not giving taxpayer dollars away, we're reinvesting it.
When it's not to say that we couldn't just build a house on there, I just don't see, I see it as a big PR problem for the city. Sure. Yeah.
And then one last thought on that, and then we can all go sit down. We've all ran into the wall already of knowing 100% that the biggest challenge here is funding. Like we've known that from day one. It's like, where does it come from? How do we get money? We need money to do stuff. Where's the money? And this is, to Arnold's point earlier, low-hanging fruit, right? It's funding that's really going to go to actually focus on a project that could make a dent, right? A lot more than just single off lots, and where the city can say, okay, now we got a great pool of money that we can go into, and nothing's given for free. It's going to be recouped in the sense that now we're going to have money go into a project that needs it for higher density, right? So that's,
Along that same train of thought, we could, and this is hypothetical, let's say we took some of those more expensive lots and we sold those all off, we put them in a fund. We could actually now angel fund, if you would, for reduced interest. Because I know people that are hard money loan, I am 27%. You can't, as a city, we could make it a market rate. That's a huge giveaway also, in a way. I mean, it's a help. It's a big help for people stepping into that workforce housing realm. And again, we're not giving away taxpayer dollars. We're making the money work. And we'll be gaining some interest on it at the end of the 20 years or whatever it ends up being.
Cool.
Just a thought.
George, we good? Chelsea? All right. Thank you guys for all that time spent with that. That was super helpful.
Would you hand these out to everybody?
Mr. Chairman, are
so
you
before Randy, oh, sorry, George.
You're
go
moving
ahead.
on to the other.
Yeah, I
topic?
think so.
Because
Before
I think
Randy
that
throws something at me.
yeah,
I think
Randy's done a whole bunch of work on a particular property, the one near the Boys and Girls Club, as an example of how this could be done. And I think, first of all, he keeps mentioning my name, but all I've done is provide zoning input to him. He's done all the work and gets the credit for this. It is an example of how this could be done. It's an example that's scalable, which I think is important. So it could be done on a larger scale with larger lots, or it could be done on properties this small size. So I'm going to hand it to Randy.
Well, that's not totally true. He's my partner in crime, period. So before I start talking about that specific piece, when we heard from the police chief or the assistant chief, that we only had 4 applicants for 4 positions. We're in a crisis right now. It's not 5 years from now. It's not a year from now. It's right now. So we need to start working on this. And I hope this is if nothing more, a blueprint to get us going on a possible solution. And I'll get to that in a second. The other thing that bothers me, and when people say the city, when I talk to civilians about this problem, they always say, well, the city, the city, the city. Well, as you know, the city's not a bottomless pit. The city is all of us, and they're not just flush with all this money, and everybody seems to think they are. Why doesn't the city just do this, or why doesn't the city just do that? And so whenever I take on these kinds of problems with my old municipality, I always look for win-win situations. Everybody wins. Nobody gives up something for nothing. And what I'm about to tell you today, I feel, is in that realm, that everybody will win. Some are going to have to be real patient to win, but we will win. Now, this project that we're looking at, what's the name of the street again? Alarcon. You guys have it in front of you. I've done the hard numbers, guys. No developer is going to make any money on this thing out of the gates. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen at all. I'm going to ask George to talk here for a second about our banking and our banking system here, and I know Tony knows about that.
It's going to be really short. I don't know anything about it.
Well, what they have to do. Come on, tell them. I'll hold it.
I actually don't know. I'm not sure what you want me to talk about.
A government requirement to invest back in the community.
Oh, there is a Reinvestment Act. Actually, Tony can talk probably much better about that for banking institutions. So reinvestment often is done through loan programs and grant programs. So
Outright cash.
maybe it's Tony who talks for a minute about it. What's the Reinvestment Act and what's it require?
Well, it's not easy, but every bank is required to have a Community Reinvestment Act plan of some kind. Depending on their size, the amounts and terms change. But in my experience, having been with Chase, which is a fairly large bank, they were very open to anything that made sense to them that, number one, helped the community, and number two, they could present positively to their depositors or customers. That's the 2 major things they look at. I was never turned down for a request if you could show them those 2 things, ever. Maybe it was less than I wanted, but I always asked for more anyway. But they were granted.
So positive PR is important.
Well, yeah, to them it is, because they can say, look what we did for your community, and a bank is profitable business just like any other business, and the more good press they get helps their business. So, I would be happy to approach the banks here and see what we can get done. I don't have any problem with that. But once we get further along where we know what we're doing, then years ago for Habitat, not this community, another one, I got all the banks together and said, we need to build one house. And the biggest stickler I got was a small bank said, oh yeah, you'll take credit for everything. And I said, no, it's just going to be these banks built this house. We're not telling how much we all donated or who the lead bank was. And they all agreed, this was credit unions also, and we built a house. And in the paper, it just said the following banks made this possible. And everybody got the good, positive press. And I think that's the way we have to approach it here. The same way. You hit all the banks. I know you're small, but we're not going to say you gave $20,000. We're just going to say you're a willing participant to help the community. Because when you start talking about dollars, the small banks feel intimidated. Because a Chase can say, oh, we'll give $5 million, and Foothill says, well, we can only give $300,000. It kind of makes them not want to belong. I think it's probably more psychological than anything else. But if you could present it where we're not judging anybody's amount, just participate, just help us. Because they all have those funds out there available for community reinvestment. They then have to figure a way to use it which qualifies under the federal program. That's all.
Tony, can you dropped a number of 5 million out there. Isn't it generally to the scope of the community? I mean, Chase isn't going to give a $5
No,
million
no.
gift here, right?
It depends on, well, it depends on the program. It depends on how many people it helps. They're not going to give $5 million to help one person or, 10 people. And I'm not saying they'd give $5 million here. I'm not saying it's impossible either. It's how you present it to them and what benefit they think they get from it. Prescott is a very wealthy town. The banks have a lot of Prescott money in them. So the population is as important to the bank as the profitability of the people that bank with them. So I would think Prescott would get significantly more than let's say Kingman, because of the net worth of the people that live there per capita. Yeah. So at least it was 100 years ago when I was in the bank. So.
Well, guys, just to take that one step further, I put myself in the position as a developer on this project. So I went to my lending bank, which is Pinnacle Bank, who's very community oriented. And remember what I said a few minutes ago, win-win everybody. Don't give me money. I'm not asking for money. What I was asking for is 100% financing to build this. Now, banks don't like to do that. Typically, my projects, I got to put 35% cash equity in. They'll loan me 65, maybe 70% tops. I'm asking for 100% loan on this, full equity position by them to take the chance on this development. Now, that's if I'm doing it because they know me. Some other developer, I don't know. But once again, I put myself in that position. So that was their input. They're not going to lose any money. They're going to charge market rate on that money. No loss, win-win, right? So here's my plan. We take this piece of property right here, the city owns it. We establish a value to it today. Now I'm just going to pick a number out of my head. So let's say it's worth 100 grand. I don't know what it's worth. George says we can put 6 units on it. So it's worth $100,000. Okay. The city's going to partner with a developer, joint venture. City's going to put up the land. They're not responsible for any of the financials on it. The developer takes out the loan. He builds the buildings. I estimate that cost is going to be skinny at 175 a square foot. 175 a square foot is, Luther and I talked about. That's a pretty good number. But remember, it's fairly flat, minimal grading, no retaining walls required. Infrastructure's out in the street. All we got to do is just underground and tap in. So maybe that's a legit number. I don't know. But I hope so on that one. Because if it's not, the developer's going backwards. So the developer builds this thing with loaned money, 100%. Okay? So he's not out of pocket anything. He's going to be out of pocket for engineering and design. Because he can't get his permits and he can't get his loan until he does engineering and design. That's it. He borrows the rest of the money. Okay? Now the project's done. Typically projects, multifamily or apartments, they go from construction financing. There's a little bit of a bridge loan of a couple of years to get the property vetted, and then they go into long-term financing. When they get done, the city takes a second trustee position on that 100 grand. Now you're not earning any interest on that money at all. That's interest free. And for the next 10 years, that remains a workforce housing project. You're in second trustee position as a city. And because we're doing that with no interest and no increased value in the land, over 10 years, that land's going to be worth a lot more than 100 grand, right? We have say in control of the rent for 10 years. Now we tie it to, I don't know, you financial people come up with something, some gross product or whatever you tie the rent increase to, whatever it is, but we control it for 10 years. The developer makes no money for 10 years. If I did this project, I ran this by my partner a few days ago. He's like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no, dude, it's the civic thing to do. We don't need to make money on this. We're pretty flush. Let's just go do this. No profit, no nothing for 10 years. So what happens at the end of 10 years? The workforce time span is now run out. Now the developer can go to full market value with that piece of property, full market value on rent, and he can make a lot of money at that point, but it's going to take 10 years to get there. The city then will be paid off on that trustee position at the 10-year mark. Because that's when it, what's that? With interest? 0 interest. Okay, yeah, you're looking at me funny, but now, and I wish Ted would have stuck around. Remember what he told us? We lost $2 million by way of police training with guys leaving. Pretty historically, if you look at emergency services, if you stay 5 years with a municipality, you're not leaving after 5 years. The percentage drops way, way down, the guys that leave. Because now they're embedded in their career and the community. They're not going anywhere. I'm looking at this. When I heard the police chief and the fire chief talk to me about this, I'm thinking recruiting tool here. We got 6 nice little units. By the way, that floor plan you have in front of you is mine. Michael Taylor designed that. I built it. I know how much it costs to do it. It's a real nice little unit. You're welcome to come look at it. And I would approach Michael and say, look, you're a civic-minded guy. Don't charge me anything to use this again. I don't need you to. And the engineering is done on it. The design is done on it. What a cost savings. We just go build 6 of these things. George's idea was a great one, is a single story out front, side by side, and then a 2-story in the back, 6 units. And then some sheds on the perimeter because they're going to have places for their bicycles. No covered parking. The rest of it's greenbelt. I can see it in my head. It's a nice looking project. And out front it says Pinnacle Bank Courtyard or whatever it says, because there's the bank's recognition for contributing and doing that for us. But if we come up with a plan like this, I want to make sure I don't miss anything, but if we come up with a plan like this, we can hand it to any developer that walks into City Hall and say, here you go. What I need help with is the taxes. Is there a tax savings on this for that developer? Because he's making no money for 10 years.
It's an applied grant. You'd have to get the grant, and it'd have to be labeled as a workforce housing in order to get the grant. That's where the grant writer comes in.
Grant from the Fed or who?
Yeah, it's from the Fed.
Well, what do we want grant money? You're talking about grant money?
I think she's alluding to Light Tech. You're speaking more as like a business, like essentially your cost basis is all that you're going to show, which will be it would be a benefit to you in reducing your tax liability for 10 years because you're not
Right.
showing really making any money above your
No.
cost basis. So
And there may be some depreciation they can do in there,
Sure,
or whoever owns it, I don't know what they want to do with it. But then after 10 years, like in my case, my grandkids would love it if I did this. Because in 10 years, I'll probably, as you all know, be gone. They'll get it and they'll be happy. Because after 10 years, it converts from workforce housing, unless the developer wants to keep going because he's enjoying the taxes from a tax angle, but he can convert it to fair market value. So we got 10 years of savings. $2 million, that's where our money comes for the city. We don't waste $2 million training police officers and having them leave. Is this a guarantee they're going to stay? No, but maybe 6 of them won't. Because now the police chief can say, look, I've got a place for you to live for 2 years, 1 year, whatever constraints they want to put on it. Come here, take our job. You know you have housing. It's well within the price range you can afford. And let me speak to that for a minute, the hard numbers. My bank ran this for me. These units are about 1,100 square feet, and there's a 180 square foot deck on their back. They're really nice. But at $175 a square foot, if we go to market value, there's an annual profit of about $23,000. Market value would be $1,500 a month. I told him, no, let's work with $1,200 a month. Well, guess what? It didn't work, guys. There's a loss of $8,800 a year annually at that number. So when we talk about these grand ideas and all this property, know that it's not going to work at $1,200 a month. It's just not.
Is that your all-in pity payment?
100%.
Your taxes,
100% financing.
everything.
Yeah,
Well, no, like
Yeah.
100% financing, but your taxes.
Property. And that's another thing too. I have a
Sales
property
tax.
management company. If this were me that did this, I would blackmail them into like a 4% instead of the 5 or 6% they normally would want to get, because then they can get the rest of my stuff. Because you got to have property management in there. Remember, the developer's not making a dime. He's not going to want to manage this, right? Let me make sure I didn't forget anything. I think I got it all. Did I miss anything? Like I said, he's my partner in crime on this. But it's real important. Let's go back. establish that land value now, make no money in interest on it for 10 years, pay you off at the end. You're our joint venture partner for construction. You convert to second trustee position. You subordinate to first, which is the bank, right? You take a second trustee position, and that second trustee gives you the voting power, or whatever you want to call it, to control those rents for 10 years. That's the agreement. At the end of the time, you step away from it, you're paid off, done. But remember, if we saved a bunch of money on training police officers and they didn't leave, this is a win-win for everybody. We just have to find that developer that's willing to step up and say, look, I'm looking at the long game here, not the short game. I'm willing to do this with you guys, and let's go. And if we can make this happen on this little tiny piece of property with 6 units, could we make this happen on the 33-unit thing you talked to me about? Maybe. So now let's roll up our sleeves and get to busy. Come up with a tax deal. Connie, please help me, because I'm not a huge tax guy. I mean, go talk to mine, but he'll spin my head around, you know?
Yep.
Here, say something.
I'd actually, Randy, love to see your numbers. Did you factor in there the depreciation and also the tip after 2 years with cost of doing business, the wear and tear as you go on? Because what happens is the profit's up here, the cost is down here in your first few years, and then it starts to go like this. And then, so that would all, I mean, you'd really have to do almost a forensic audit on the project from start to finish, the value.
10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you need help with that. I mean, we did it for the 2 years. When we looked at this, we looked at property management, maintenance, taxes. And that was it. And I'm going to tell you that if I were to do this project, and there's 3 developers on this board, one of us should step up if a private guy doesn't and do this. Because like I said in the beginning,
Comes in the philanthropy. That's where that comes in terms of the, you know, I know Mike's not here now, but he's mentioned that several times. That's where it would really, because what they can get back out of the money
Mike,
is a lot more than what.
can't hear you.
Oh, that's I'm done. I'm done.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you 110%. And I tried to explain that to my partner yesterday. Look, this is just the right thing to do. It's not about making money. 10 years down the road, you'll make plenty of money. Don't worry about it. It's just the right thing to do right now to ease this crisis. I know it's only 6 units, but if this worked,
It's a start. It's a start. It's something that could be done, and there's at least a rough outline of a plan that Randy's put together that could be pursued. That's more than we've got so far. We've had a lot of theoretical discussions about what could be done. This may be a practical discussion of something that can be done instead of could be done.
Randy, real quick, just to get back to your rents. So you're saying that rent for, say, this 1,100 square foot plan here, 2-bed, 2-bath, didn't pencil at 1,200, would pencil at 1,500, at least that's about the target rate you're thinking right now.
well, that's the range. At $1,500 a month, you're positive $23,000 a year. So you're making money, okay, for maintenance and things like that. Let's scale that back. What is 1,400? What's 1,300 look like? We just didn't have enough time to crunch all of them. But work up a pro forma. If I were to do this, I'd work the pro forma so that there's no profit, because I want to remain, I'm not a nonprofit, I'm a no profit, okay, tax-wise. I don't want to make any money on this. In other words, say you're making $1,000 a month profit on it. Well, let the management company put that in a trust fund. They have them. That's where your security deposits go, and hold on to that for catastrophic repair or whatever the case is, so that the developer's not touching that money and having to deal with it from a tax, and stays in the tax category that he could potentially be in by making no profit.
So 2 parts to my inquiry pertaining to that 1,500. It sounds like that's the number one, that's a base number for maintenance upkeep moving forward. Does that not include any depreciation in there?
Well, for the owner, no, that's just straight numbers. But I think it's too strong, personally. In other words, do I need to make $23,000 a year off this property to maintain it? No,
Okay.
because within the numbers I gave you, maintenance, light maintenance, meaning like landscape, things like that, taxes, and property management are all in there. So could we do it for $1,400, $1,350? Yeah, maybe. Can't do it for $1,200. So we've kicked that $1,200 number around here a lot. And I got to tell you guys, it's never going to work, because think about the topography of this lot. This is flat,
1 second.
minimal grading.
So if we could do this for 1,400, let's say hypothetically, what would be the fair market rent on like a 1007 rent income analysis? What would the private rent income analysis look like on a comparable basis to this?
That floor plan right now at my site's $2,450 a month.
2450. So
And
that
they're
is
renting.
that is giving our municipalities, that's giving our city saying, here's a 50% discount for your workforce housing.
It's over $1,000
Okay.
a month discount.
For a $100,000 investment.
Yeah, that's not really an investment, guys. That piece of property is just sitting there dead in the water. It's doing nothing.
Well, meaning it's still an
Well-
investment in the sense that they're gaining housing.
Right.
Yeah, theoretically, the city's making $1,000 a month, so they're making 12% on their money, essentially.
How?
Yeah, but
Well,
he's,
if you're giving them $1,000 discount to have
Oh.
police officers stay there, they're going to make 12,000 theoretical dollars a year on their $100,000 investment.
There you go. I didn't think of it.
There's
that
your
way.
12%.
so in that model, Randy, when you say hypothetically you've got $1,000 per unit per month as a profit, right? And you're putting $23,000 a year, you're talking about a profit. Is
No,
that
no, no.
what you said? 23?
The $1,000 is what I charge at CALA.
Right.
I'm saying that he asked me a question, how much under market value is this floor plan in the city of Prescott? And I'm telling him that it's $1,000 per unit savings. No, if we charge $1,500 a month, we would make approximately $23,000 in a year's time.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Let's focus on the 23,000 in order to get the taxes paid. If you put that in a high interest earning account, you should be able at the end of the year with the interest earned on the 23,000 to pay up to 80% of your taxes, because you're not going to get out of paying the taxes. That's got to be factored in.
You're talking about property taxes?
I'm talking about all the taxes. The income taxes on the income, depending upon how you set up the LLC. You talked about an LLC. You said you don't want to be a for-profit or a nonprofit. You want to be a zero profit.
Right.
So what kind of taxes are you thinking you're not going to have to pay? Because you've already said you're going to have 23,000 above.
There won't be any taxes due on that project because it's a no-profit deal. I've got to take that, whatever taxes I can draw out of the federal government for doing that and use it on my other incomes, my other
Okay,
properties.
okay, I
Nothing to
see.
do with this one.
Yeah.
This one's a zero-out deal for 10 years, guys. Now, that's not totally true. As a developer, when banks look at me to loan me money, they look at our portfolio, right? Our holdings. This would be a holding with value. So that would assist that developer for other projects, not anything to do with this one, only by the way of his portfolio.
So you're talking about leveraging that property to fund or fund another project as part of your portfolio.
Nothing to do with that project, but yes.
It would never be leveraged. It would just be a placeholder.
Right. Yeah,
Randy?
it wouldn't be leveraged, no, and you would never want to be, like Luther said, leverage it so that if something happened, they could take it, no. It'd just be part of your portfolio. Yeah. And I'm not a lawyer, we'll have to get legal on this, because if we try to do this, to say, how do we have control with rent or a say in rent for 10 years, that's a long time. But there's got to be a way to do it. We got to put our thinking caps on and get outside the box here. But remember, win-win for everybody, and we sell it.
Randy, I'm a little bit confused by the math. You said 1,500 at a year and 23,000? 20, because
Overall for the whole project.
1,500 would be 18,000 in gross rents.
There's 6 units.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Profit.
Okay.
Profit, sorry.
All right. But my other question, I guess, for Chelsea or either of you, George, how does the conflict of interest policy work when we're talking about our committee in relation to some of these proposed projects?
We're going to have to get legal in on that. Yeah, as far as being a committee that recommends, I mean, there would have to be some sort of recusing, and it depends on the level of project and what exactly is involved and what kind of benefits are received. But the short answer is we would have to have legal evaluate before the committee considers anything, what that would look like. Absolutely. Thank you.
And things were going so well.
No, you're right. I've given this a lot of thought. I think my goal with you guys is to put together a packet, and I'm willing to donate the design. I'm going to get the design done. My guy's going to draft it up, and so we can, if a developer walks in that we can hook into this, he can say, here you go. This is what we propose you build. Here's the floor plan. It's not going to cost you anything for architectural. It's not going to cost you anything for structural engineering. And the field engineering is going to be pretty minimal. Here you go. This is what we want you to do. Are you interested? Now, if nobody bites on this, like I said earlier, there's 3 developers on this board that maybe one of us should step up and do it.
Well, it can even be an RFP. You can say, here's the parameters. You have to keep your rents low for 10 years, and this is the land structure. But then it's just an RFP, and it's like, hey, knock yourself out.
Yeah. So,
But can I inject again, or do you want to say something, John?
yeah, no, I was just gonna say I don't want to get too much in the weeds of like taxes, what problems the developer has to figure out. I think for the purposes of what we do as a committee, I just need kind of, do we like this idea? Target rents make sense. Preservation of 10 years of workforce housing sounds good to me. This is my personal feelings about it. So I think having, we talked about like following an index on rents, second position liens. I mean, I think as a committee, our job is to say, do we like this idea? Can we move forward with putting more details together? Because the city has to make some decisions, right? City's going to be, we're good with a second lien position on this deal, right? Let's talk to the attorney and see what the agreement, is it the RFP process or is it a public-private type of agreement or whatever, right? I think if we could just get that today from the committee, whether we want to kind of engage staff to start doing those things, I think that's what we should probably talk about, is if you guys feel like we can move the ball down the road here.
One last thing, and then we'll do that I forgot to say, is that to entice that developer, he will never build a sixplex as cheaply as he will build this, because the land, I'm sure we're going to work out some grace on some utility stuff, architectural, engineering, he's going to save a lot of money. He will never build it this cheap. Now, he has to wait 10 years to realize it, but he could never do what we have the power to let him do. Okay. George has something to say.
Thank you, Randy. Well, I agree with John completely. One of the things that we talked about earlier was getting your input for focus, because again, we all have other jobs that we're assigned to do. So being able to add extra time in to do these things is important to us, and we want to participate and do it. So being able to say, yes, this is worth pursuing, or I think it's a bridge too far, helps us in prioritizing. So.
I just think it's worth noting too for the committee that, and Randy, thank you first of all, honestly, for sitting down, taking the time, putting your developer hat on and just crunching numbers, right? That's all it takes for sometimes is just talk to the finance guys, talk to these guys, talk to George, put it all together. So thank you for taking the time to do that. I think what stood out to me is that you're at 100%, so this is just perspective, 100% financing, which doesn't exist other than very strong relationships like Randy has with his bankers. And at 100% financing, this deal would not pencil even close to where we needed to be for target rents. So that's probably the takeaway, I think, for me personally, is that if we had Randy crunch these numbers, that is a power punch of realism for this committee to start chewing on, of saying, okay, so at 100% financing, which I don't think most developers are going to get for any of these projects, unless it's very a strong PR charitable type of push, right? It's like, hey, we need help here as a city. Pinnacle really wants to be in that space. Can we do something here? But with that said, that's why for me, I would love to see this grow some legs and some momentum to keep having the city focus on how it would come together, because that's huge. I mean, thinking that someone has to come in with 35% of equity and finance 65% of it, and then try to wait 10 to 15 to 20 years and try to recoup some of that is going to be very challenging. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it definitely paints a picture of how much of each player, of every person around the table has to give to really fix the problem. Because the city's also in a position, right? We've kept saying this over and over again. This is a good example of the city to be able to put some skin in the game, in the sense of saying, second lien position, not the greatest, but this is 6 units. 10-year preservation of workforce housing. Like, it's almost like, do we want the lot to sit there, or do we want 6 units? Right? That's kind of what it comes down to.
But John,
Go ahead, Rennie.
the importance of this is it can work. It's just not going to work at $1,200 a month.
Mm-hmm.
More like 14, it'll work. At 15, we're making money, or whoever the developer is. At 1,400, it could work. And I think 1,400 is kind of within the range we've been talking for rent for these folks, right? If their starting salary is $61,000 a year, 1,400 a month is attainable.
Mm-hmm.
And this floor plan isn't 400 square feet like what we saw out in PV at Baja. This is almost 1,100 square
Sure.
feet. You could put your family in there if you need to. Be tight, but you could do it. So it was pointed out to me that we don't hire a lot of 21-year-old police officers. We try to hire 27, 28, 29-year-old police officers with experience. That comes with a family.
Mm-hmm.
So that thing at Baja would not work for that kind of recruitment.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. I meant more like, if you look at what market private sector is going to be able to achieve, that's why we see $2,400, $2,500 rents, right? Is because you're talking 100% financing, being at zero profit. I mean, it's like you're making this as skinny as possible, and it's at $1,500, $1,400 rent, which is, I'm not saying that's bad. $1,400 to $1,500 is even surprising to me that we could be that affordable. That's $1,000 under market, right? That's huge. I'm just saying it's a great picture for us to start digesting a little bit, to go, so $1,000 of rent, right, in the market space. Essentially what I'm saying is, it's not going to fix, unless it's this complicated of a deal, right, where everybody's throwing in a little skin in the game, 100% financing, city throwing in the dirt and all that. It's going to be extremely challenging to just open the doors to any developer to come in and say, hey, can you do something similar like this, and then not make money for, a while? And
take a minute to help address that, because it's a valid concern. How do we make this something that can be replicated and emulated and feasible for future projects? So the answer to that, I believe, there's a couple moving parts. Is number one, if we have that many contributions coming into the picture, then it's not necessarily 100%, okay? Because we have sweat equity, okay? So let's take that into consideration as an example.
I'm losing you. You lost me.
The project is coming in under value, okay? So that is equity. So it's not necessarily 100% loan to value. Let's take a look at the dynamics of that. The other moving piece to that puzzle is, earlier in this meeting, we were talking about CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, and how FDIC chartered banks are regulated on a federal level, that they must reinvest. And if what they like is credit, well, can we leverage CRA to be used in conjunction with these projects so that the LTV, the loan to value, from the prospective commercial lender, they're taking that into consideration. We have grants, we have sweat equity, we have other variables, so that, again, that, to John's point, is that we have something that can be re-emulated with another builder on another project at a future point in time.
Well, guys, that's why we did this, George and I. We just want to get all your minds working toward a common goal, and let's get something going here. We can finally actually have something to show for our year and a half of a committee effort.
You know, you could actually market this model if you can get it all in writing and get the math. But the other thing that some of the other developments that have already started is getting over the Fair Housing Act. You're going to have to look into that because you're talking about rent controlling. But there are, as he said, there's different ways to subsidize this. If you get that category of workforce housing attached and labeled to this model, it does open. You haven't even talked about the grant process. You might be able to get some amazing grants right off the, to add to this. That adds to your bottom line a lot. So those are all components of this workforce housing issue that are being explored all through the country.
But remember, this is a 10-year deal, so how do you get rid of those things when you hit the 10-year mark? That would be my concern.
And that is the string I talk about. The string to the grant money, the government money. There's, again, the biggest thing of all is that Fair Housing Act. How are you going to be able to control this? If you decide you want to control it, you're going to have to leave the government money out of the component because I don't think you're going to be able to do both.
Well, I think it would be a contract, and I'm not a lawyer, so I think it'd be a contract between the city and the developer about the 10-year mark. Now, can they break the contract? Maybe, I don't know, but try to get something in writing that we both are bound to for those 10 years and stay away from the grants, stay away from all that Fed money because there's too many strings. This is a win-win again, clean. The thing I proposed right here. And the developer's going to make a lot of money, but he's going to make it 10 years from now. He's not going to make it now.
We just had one flip.
Can't hear you, hon.
Complex over by Safeway. The apartment complex over by Safeway, if it's kind of set off to the left as you go up White Spar, they just met their 20-year mark for their subsidizing. I think you know this, right? Pardon me? Oh, okay.
That was low income tax credit funded originally, so they had a reduced tax.
So the 20-year mark came and went, and they pretty much evicted. I mean, I've been getting letters like crazy. I don't know what the percentage of the full eviction. They all 100% eviction notices, but they could choose to stay there at now the market rate. And so because that was a very heavily occupied retirement community, people on fixed incomes, many of them had to leave. I've received, and you probably have too, letters from many of them, wondering and just befuddled what's going on. But these are the things we have to be aware of with the grant funding from the United States government.
Well, that's why I say stay away from that. This is a Band-Aid, guys. This is a 10-year Band-Aid. This isn't the permanent fix.
Yeah. Well, this would be disclosed to every tenant, and I would imagine that everybody in that apartment complex got
It would have been
notice.
a requirement of their lease.
Yeah.
That
Hey, FYI, on this day, on this year, rents are changing,
Yeah.
period, dot, end of story. Same thing with this.
There's no duty to disclose when you're a tenant. As a tenant, the owner had no duty to disclose that. That's a private.
Actually, I think they did. Under the LIHTC rules, it had to be part of the lease that it was LIHTC funded and that would expire.
Isn't it only the last 5 years? We'll have to look into that because a lot of the people that moved in, I asked one of them to see their lease. I saw nothing in the lease at all to see if we could protect them.
One important thing to keep in mind when you're talking about grant funding, we all think of federal grant funding or federal pass-through to the state. There's a lot of private money out there that doesn't have as many strings, or they have different types of strings that need to be looked at as part of the whole. So one of the things that we may be able to help a prospective developer do is reach out to these other private grant funding agencies and say, go talk to them. They may be able to help offset the cost of something in the construction that, in Randy's case, he's worked out with the bank by 100% financing, that they may be able to make up the difference through a grant fund from a private source that doesn't have the same kind of strings that a federal grant would have.
And the other thing, back to I'm using the police officer example. I'm not saying this is cop town. This could be whatever, but let's stick with the police for a second. If those officers are allowed to live there for 1 year, I don't know who would determine how long they can stay. I guess the police chief. But if they had their 1 year, 6 officers times 10 years, that's 60 police officers that may not leave this city. That cost $100,000 a year, or I mean, not a year, but $100,000 to train. Do the math. So when you talk about that measly $100,000 the city put into this thing, are you kidding me? Win, win, win.
Yeah, I mean, I just need to hear from you guys. Do
Yes.
we have consensus to just kind of move the needle here and have staff at least start looking into these legalities that we've brought up, kind of the conflict of interest and what was the other one? The type of contract and process of what legally would put this together? You guys good with that? All right, cool. Is that for Amber? Well, Michael, somebody? We'll just.
Thanks
put
for
that out
doing
to
this,
the staff.
Randy.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. That was super helpful. Did we officially move to 3C for that as
We
possible
are
tools?
We are in 3C.
We are in 3C, correct?
We
Okay.
3C'd it. Yep.
Okay, gotcha. Real quick, something I wanted to bring up now for a while too, and just to piggyback off of you mentioned this on infrastructure, we're still on that 3C, is I know we've talked about before on the city's water policy, right? So we talk about resources of what land is one of them. Water is a huge one. You know, as a developer, Luther, right? Water is a big deal. It's a very, very valuable resource that the city has in its disposal to kind of, boost these projects, if you will, right? Because it is a little difficult to try to secure water. I would just recommend to this committee, or not recommend, but I would just wanted to see if there's consensus enough to actually look. I know we talked about it maybe like 5 meetings ago or something, but to look at that water policy and to see if that's a resource, since we're talking about kind of tools of what we can be doing. Water is going to be part of the conversation in this project or any other project. So it's probably best that we start moving in that direction as well, to start seeing that water policy and going, okay, what can we do? What can we recommend to council for the city to be able to utilize that and kind of turbocharge some of these projects? And I don't know if that's an agenda item, Chelsea, we could add, or if that's just something we can start working towards if
Yeah.
the committee's good with that.
So, and I think we were talking about that one in relation to a broader workforce housing policy, that would be a component, how to expedite through the water policy. Not that the committee is looking to amend in any way the existing water policy that was just updated and approved. So this would be a conversation, for a workforce housing broader scope policy, and that would be one component. But it would probably help to focus on that one component before we get overwhelmed with looking at what all components need to be as it relates to a workforce housing policy. So that could be a separate, a future agenda item.
Yeah, because I think that was priority number 4 based on all of our little survey we took. That was number 4 was the greater policy, the workforce housing policy. But because we're already getting in the weeds of trying to kick off some projects, water is going to be part of that conversation. I think starting to see water policy stuff and getting it through the committee would be wise.
Water fees, tap fees, permit fees, all that can go into this project. I mean, I don't know what the permit would cost on this, but it would be large.
Can we add also, when we're talking about future agenda items, I wasn't aware until Sandy shared with us that there's a proposed impact fee, development fee increase. I think that's a really big conversation for us as a committee because it feels very counterintuitive to the big picture.
What is the city, how much leeway do you have, George?
Yeah, George.
Thank you for throwing me in the middle of
Go ahead, George.
Impact fees, we don't have a lot of flexibility on, partly because of state law requirements. Impact fees, if we have them, have to be paid. If we don't charge a developer or builder the impact fee, the citizens of Prescott pay it out of their tax money. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just said if we charge an impact fee, if we have an impact fee on the books, that impact fee has to be paid. You can't waive an impact fee by state law. You can pay the impact fee instead of the developer, but that's money out of the taxpayer's pocket. And that becomes a lot harder for councils to do, to pay an impact fee for a private developer or to pay an impact fee for even a private developer who's building something that we really want, because you're spending taxpayer dollars on something that you didn't tell the taxpayer you were going to spend that money on. Fees are a different story, although they're similar. All of our fees are designed to offset the cost of our time, city staff time. It pays for the cost of the inspectors, the plans reviewers, the engineers in the engineering department, fire review personnel. We don't arbitrarily set fees. Those fees have to be justified, and we justify them by time, how much city staff time is taken to accomplish the work necessary on our side to review a project before we issue. So again, not charging those fees means the taxpayers are paying, because when you're not paying me to review your plans, the taxpayers are paying me to do something else.
Got it.
So just something to keep in mind.
Could we
We all
talk?
have skin in the game.
Could we talk more about this maybe next time to understand why
More
are we
detail?
proposing a 45% increase? Like, how does that break down? And is this a requirement completely? Like, I just would like to better understand myself.
I think
Yeah.
it's the best time to do it because we have a project on the table.
Sure. Well, and we can also have Public Works. They have a consultant, Raftillis, do all of the breakdown and make the proposals as far as how much should be. I know that as far as Public Works is concerned, they've deferred, I think, about $30 million worth of capital improvement projects to not make the impact fees as high as maybe they should be to accommodate those projects. So there's a lot of moving pieces as it relates to that, and it being a completely a Public Works thing, I'd prefer having one of them attend and really talk about what they are, what they do, and what the increase is all about. So, good one.
Because memory serves that the city put up $500,000 on the school thing, right, for the underground. How did that $500,000, how was that done? Like money or forgiveness or reduction? How was it done?
Yeah, we're getting long on time. Yeah, but this is all great stuff to come back around. Next future items, I mean, we kind of hammered them out already, 3D on, because now that project's on the table already, we can really kind of come around that project and
Yep.
start hammering out impact fees, how water's going to look like, Public Works getting involved and all that stuff.
We can really get a template, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what's so exciting to me. That's why I'm doing this. And I'm going to donate the design. That'll be my donation to the board.
Well, and that can springboard for our next discussion of saying, can we do a home of my own on all these other little projects with the same framework? You can't resell this for 10 years, or you can't, if you do resell it, you got to sell it for a specified cost, and then leverage all of the city's land for the same direction.
One of the things, too, just getting back to what Nicole was talking about, if you all have time, tune into, you can get it online in the video, the study session that was surrounding the impact fees that Mark Woodfill and Public Works and Chelsea participated, and I think George did too. So you have a deep understanding of what these impact fees mean. I mean, they're called impact fees for a reason. It's the impact of growth, to try to mitigate the impacts of growth. So it's not like it's just arbitrary money that we just grab, and it's dedicated money. It's not money that we can say, oh, I don't want it to go towards a fire station. I'd like to have a workforce housing. It doesn't work that way. This money is dedicated for something. So if you can pull up that video, do you guys remember the date? Oh, that'd be great. Oh, okay. That way you'll understand this thing from the bottom up. It's complicated.
And one last thing, John, I'm going to put this in writing now that I've told you,
Yeah.
my little proposed format, so you guys can all have it and look at it and start
That's great.
dissecting it. And maybe next meeting, we can talk
Yep.
a little more about it.
Yeah, I think we have plenty to talk about as far as agenda next meeting. Okay. We're going to move on here to number 4. Any updates? Staff announcements?
I do have an update. The grant, our ADO grant, did pass through council during the last city voting session, which is great. Current status is we have 3 bids out regarding the needs assessment piece. Probably expect those at the end of July, early August. That's the update with that. Do you have
Any
an
questions
update,
on that?
Amber?
All right.
Oh, no, you're good.
Oh, I was just going to see if we knew of any other projects that might be coming to either planning and zoning, historic preservation, any other housing projects that we want workforce housing attendance at.
Can I ask a question to Michael?
Yes.
About the grant. Is the proposal just for the plan or also a person? Is it a job?
So, good question. The contract that was passed by council is the needs assessment piece, as well as either hire a permanent employee or contract that position of a program manager.
So we are advertising a position right now?
We are not. We haven't. This is something we'll have to discuss in a future meeting. I would think right now the focus is strictly on the needs assessment, getting that bid out, receiving the bids, and moving forward with that. So whether hiring a full-time person or contracting that position, we're not there yet, and that'll be future discussion, I think.
I'm just confused because I thought we talked about ideally if we could find a person that could do both, we could pay that person more to make it more attractive.
Right. So where we're at right now is it's at least the contract that we had with ADO, with the Arizona Department of Housing, made it really clear that the needs assessment has to be separate. So, and that's what we got from the committee, I believe, is we want as much money as possible to be dedicated to a person. So what we're looking at and what we communicated to these bids is, kind of bare bones a little bit. We want to utilize this 200,000, which they know that we're getting for a person. So that's what we're looking at next. So that next piece of it.
So how much are we paying for the needs assessment?
We don't know yet. We haven't gotten the bids back yet. So it's a maximum per the contract of 60,000. So we're hoping for something a lot less than, when the bids come in, a lot less than that 60,000. So we can hire somebody or contract out, 150, 160, someone that can come in and manage this program.
So is the thought process that whomever we award this bid to could also be that person? Is that what we're preferring?
Right. So, and correct me if I'm wrong. Your question is one person to do it all, kind of thing.
I think the question was if we hire a company to do the needs assessment, which does need to be done first,
right?
Could that company then take over the remainder of the work that's necessary under the scope of the Arizona Department of Housing contract, which included developing an implementation plan and then implementing that plan? Mm-hmm. And that may be a possibility.
It's possible. It's possible.
We've heard some of the bidding companies maybe could do it. Some of them have said probably not. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. George and Chelsea and Michael, do you think it would be possible? I think it would be a really good look for the committee to understand those strings. Would it be possible for them to have a copy of all of the requirements that are surrounding that grant? Because I know we were all surprised when we actually read it. There's a lot of strings attached to that money. So I think it would be really good for you all to get kind of a first look if you go forward and want to continue to borrow money and see what these strings are. Read them, because some of them we were even surprised. So I don't know if it's possible. I mean, can we get a copy of the grant and all the requirements?
That should have been sent out to everyone. I'll send it again. It's the contract, the latest contract that went to council on June 25th. has the language in there of the agreement with ADO. So
And when it comes to spending any of the money, we will have to go back to council once we get the bids. So once we know how much the bid is for the assessment, that's kind of where we'll be able to go back to council and also ask their permission or guidance of, we know we have to do the assessment. This is how much we got bid. Are you okay with us using the remainders on a person? Because again, council could say no. Council could say, nope, we want you to just handle the needs. So at that point, once we know exactly how much the needs are, we can go back to council and say, okay, we have this much remaining. We want to put it towards a person.
Okay, thank you guys for that. All right, if we don't have anything else, we can adjourn this meeting. And I don't know. Yeah, strong work, everybody. We're adjourned at 11:51.
Yeah, it was.
under 2 hours.
Then what happened?